My name is Nina Flores, and on October 12th, 2024, I learned exactly how dangerous it is when a fool in a $4,000 suit tries to insult your life's work in front of men who are paid to agree with him. It began like any other Tuesday. The sky over the city was the color of old pewter, a light rain slicking the streets. My 2012 Audi A4, a car I maintained with the same meticulous care as my code, hummed through the traffic. It was a machine of elegant logic, predictable, reliable, everything the world of business was not. By 7:15 a.m., I was walking through the glass doors of the OmniPay Tower. The air in the lobby was thick with the smell of wet wool coats and the burnt sugar of the coffee stand's morning rush. I bypassed it all. My coffee was a single origin pour-over I made myself, from beans I ground each morning. A simple, repeatable process with a perfect outcome. My office was on the 34th floor. One wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, but it didn't look out over the city. It looked down into the heart of the building, the server farm, my sanctum. The air down there had a unique scent, a cool mix of ozone and conditioned air. It was the smell of pure potential. From my desk, I could see the pulsing green and blue lights of the server racks. They were the physical manifestation of my creation, the Aegis Vault. I sat down, the leather of my chair cool against my back. On the corner of my desk, my succulent rootkit stood guard. I gave its pot a quarter turn, a daily ritual. I put on my headphones, and the precise, mathematical beauty of Bach's cello suites filled my head, drowning out the office chatter. Then I woke up Aegis. On my primary monitor, the system's interface bloomed to life. It wasn't a series of boring charts and numbers. It was a flowing, organic visualization of the billions of transactions OmniPay processed daily. A river of light. My job was to keep that river clean, safe, and flowing. Aegis was my masterpiece, a zero-trust, cryptographically sealed environment with a key rotation system based on a quantum random number generator. It was, for all intents and purposes, impenetrable. He had no idea what he was really trying to steal. He just saw a line item on a budget. I saw a fortress. My fortress. That morning, a flicker of red caught my eye. A coordinated probing attempt from an IP cluster in Eastern Europe. Amateurs. I watched their brute force attack shatter against Aegis's outer defenses. I isolated the cluster, traced it back to a shell corporation, and permanently blacklisted their entire domain block. It took me less time than it takes to brew a cup of tea. It was a satisfying, quiet victory, the kind I liked. The peace was broken at 9 a.m. sharp. I didn't need to look at the clock. I heard him, the sound of his expensive, hard-soled loafers slapping against the polished concrete floor. A sound of unearned confidence. Charles Albright III, or Chad, as he insisted everyone call him, was our new CEO. He was 29 years old, with a marketing degree, a trust fund, and the kind of blinding self-assurance that only comes from never having been told no. He was talking loudly on his phone as he approached my section of the floor. 100%, Kyle, he brayed. We need to actionize our deliverables. It's all about the synergy of the verticals. I made a note to look up what a synergy of the verticals might be. I suspected it was a mythical creature, like a griffin or a profitable social media company. He ended his call and, without knocking, pushed open my office door. The smell of his cologne, something aggressive and citrusy, invaded my space. Nina, he said, flashing teeth that were too white. Big day. Big ideas. He walked over to the glass wall overlooking the server farm. So this is it, huh? The firewall thingy. I took a slow breath. It's a zero-trust transaction environment, Chad. Right, whatever. He waved a dismissive hand. Listen, I need you to poke some holes in it. I kept my face perfectly still. I'm sorry? Holes, he repeated as if I were a child. For OmniPay Connect, the new data sharing initiative, we need to open up some APIs, let our partners tap into the data stream. It's a game changer, I explained in simple, direct terms, why that was a monumentally bad idea. I talked about unsecured data channels, the risk of man-in-the-middle attacks, the way it would invalidate our PCI compliance and violate the core principles of the Aegis architecture. What he didn't understand was that Aegis wasn't a wall you could just poke holes in. It was a sealed ecosystem. Its strength was its completeness. A single, unauthorized API was not a window. It was a self-destruct button. His eyes glazed over. I could see the words bouncing off his perfectly coiffed hair. When I finished, he just smiled. Look, I didn't get any of that tech talk. Just make it happen. He patted me on the shoulder, a gesture of casual ownership. You're our tech lady, Nina. I'm sure you'll figure it out. He walked out, leaving the scent of his cologne lingering like a threat. I stared at his retreating back, at the absurdly expensive cut of his Brioni suit. Tech lady. For the next 2 months, that's what I was. The indignities piled up, small and sharp like broken glass. In a meeting where I presented a 40-page risk analysis of his OmniPay Connect project, he flipped through it in 10 seconds. Looks great, he said, tossing it on the table, but let's focus on the synergy. A week later, I received an email. My department's budget was being cut by 50%. The funds were being reallocated to the marketing campaign for OmniPay Connect, a project that did not yet exist and, if I had my way, never would. The final cut came in a department heads meeting. It was a Wednesday. I was wearing a simple black pantsuit by theory. Clean lines, functional, professional. Chad, in a blazer the color of a peacock, was talking about disruption. The old ways are holding us back, he announced to the room. We need to be agile. We need to be lean. We need disruptors, not gatekeepers in outdated pantsuits. He looked directly at me. The room went silent. A few of the vice presidents, men I had worked with for a decade, suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. I felt a cold, clean anger settle in my gut. It wasn't hot or loud. It was quiet and hard, like a diamond. The day of the board meeting was October 12th. The rain was coming down in sheets. The boardroom on the 40th floor felt like a tomb. Stale air, overpriced water bottles, and a dozen gray-faced men in identical suits. Chad was at the head of the table, glowing with a kind of manic energy. He gave his presentation. It was a masterpiece of corporate nonsense, full of hockey stick graphs and words like monetize and ideate. He promised exponential growth. He promised market disruption. Then he asked for the board's final approval to launch OmniPay Connect. The chairman, a man whose spine had been surgically removed years ago, turned to me. Nina. Your final assessment? I stood up. I didn't need a presentation. The facts were my presentation. I laid them out, one by one. I told them the project was technically unsound. I told them it would expose every single transaction to unacceptable risk. I told them it would likely result in catastrophic data loss and regulatory fines in the hundreds of millions. I concluded by saying that launching OmniPay Connect would not be a business risk. It would be an act of corporate suicide. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. I had laid the truth on the polished mahogany table. Chad's face was a mask of fury. His tan couldn't hide the blotchy red creeping up his neck. I had embarrassed him. I had shown the men in the room that their king was not just naked, but incompetent. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Thank you, Nina, he said, his voice dripping with venom, for that masterclass in fear-mongering. It's clear to me you don't fit into our new, agile, profit-centric culture. You are a relic, a bottleneck. He walked towards me. You're so afraid of the future. You'd rather hide behind your firewalls than innovate. You're not a team player. He stopped in front of me, his voice low and cruel. OmniPay is a rocket ship, Nina, and you're still on the launch pad. He turned to the board. Effective immediately, Nina Flores' employment is terminated. No one moved. No one spoke. I looked at the faces of the men I had protected for 15 years. They stared back, their expressions blank. I slowly packed my tablet into my bag, stood up, and walked to the door. I did not look back. I felt 24 pairs of eyes on my back, but I kept my head high. The fury in my gut had cooled. It was now a single, perfect point of purpose. My apartment was my refuge. Minimalist, clean lines, everything in its place. The first thing I did was pour myself 3 fingers of Lafroig. The smoky, peaty taste was a comfort. I sat on my sofa and looked out at the rain-streaked city. I did not feel defeated. I felt activated. I went into my study and retrieved a laptop from my safe. It was a hardened, air-gapped machine that had never touched the OmniPay network. I powered it on. The screen was black, save for a simple, stark interface. Vespers Protocol. Below the words was a countdown timer. 71 hours, 14 minutes, and 32 seconds. I had built this system with one hidden feature: an insurance policy. After I discovered the previous CEO, Chad's father, was running a sophisticated money laundering scheme through a series of back-end shell transactions, I knew I needed leverage. I documented everything. Every transaction, every account number, every falsified record. I encrypted it all in a single, impenetrable file. That file sat on an anonymous cloud server, wired to this timer. The Vespers Protocol was simple. Every 72 hours I had to log in and enter a 64-character passphrase, a line from Marcus Aurelius that I knew by heart. If the timer ever reached 0, the protocol would automatically decrypt the file and email its entire contents to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the top financial journalists at the Wall Street Journal. I looked at the timer, ticking down the seconds. I took a slow sip of my scotch, and I closed the laptop. The next morning, I packed a small bag. A few changes of clothes, some hiking boots, and my worn copy of Meditations. I got in my Audi and drove north towards the mountains. I had a small cabin there, a place with no internet and no cell service. There was no panic, no frantic rush. This was not a move made in anger. It was the calm execution of a long-dormant piece of code. I was simply letting the logic play out. I could picture the chaos back at OmniPay. I knew Chad would have appointed some sycophant to my position. I knew that person would try to access the Aegis Vault's administrative controls, and I knew what would happen next. Access denied. I had hard-coded my biometric signature and a rotating quantum key as the only way to access the system's core. The system was loyal to its creator. Without me, Aegis would function, but it would be a locked box. They would be blind. Error messages, written in my own terse, sarcastic style, would fill their screens. Warnings they wouldn't understand. The system itself would be rejecting them. I spent 2 days hiking. The clean, cold mountain air was a balm. I read. I drank my coffee black. I didn't think about OmniPay. I didn't have to. I had already written the last chapter. On Friday afternoon, as I was sitting on my cabin's small porch, my phone, which I had only just turned on, buzzed with a news alert. It was from the Wall Street Journal. The headline was simple: OmniPay at center of massive money laundering scandal. Stock halted. I read the first paragraph. An anonymous source had provided the paper with an unredacted ledger, a ledger that not only detailed the crimes of the former CEO, but showed that his son, Charles Albright III, had foolishly continued and expanded the scheme. I took a sip of water. I watched his world collapse in real time. News alerts began to flood my phone. The stock was in freefall. Federal agents were raiding the OmniPay tower. And then the best part, a link to a live news conference. There was Chad, his face pale and sweaty under the hot lights. He was babbling. He talked about hackers, about corporate espionage, about short sellers. He used the word synergy. He was a man drowning in the consequences of his own arrogance. An hour later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman named Maria Sandoval. She was the federal receiver appointed to oversee the emergency restructuring of OmniPay. She asked if I could come back to the city. Immediately. The boardroom was a different world. The mahogany table was covered in laptops and legal documents. The air was thick with the smell of fear and stale coffee. Maria Sandoval, a woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, was in charge. And sitting at the far end of the table, looking small and broken in his ridiculously expensive suit, was Chad. He was flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The remaining board members, the same men who had watched me walk out, were there too. They looked like they had aged a decade in 3 days. Chad saw me and tried to speak. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I ignored him, my focus entirely on Miss Sandoval. "We need to understand what happened, Ms. Flores," she said, her voice calm and direct. "We need to secure the system. We need to know what's real and what's not." I finally turned my head and looked at Chad. I looked at the man who had called me a relic, who had mocked my work, who had tried to humiliate me. The look on his face when he realized it was a symphony of emotions, fear, confusion, and dawning in his dull eyes, the horrifying understanding that this was not a random attack. This was a response. I turned back to Miss Sandoval. "Security is only a cost center," I said, my voice clear and steady in the silent room, "until the day it isn't." The weight of that simple truth seemed to suck the remaining air from the room. Chad slumped in his chair as if I had physically struck him. It was over. I watched the news feed on my phone as they escorted him from the building, the perp walk, his hands cuffed behind his back, his face a mask of disbelief. His professional humiliation was absolute. The next day, I met with what was left of the investors. They offered me my old job back. They offered me a raise. They offered me an apology. I let them finish. "No," I said. The color drained from their faces. "Here are my terms," I continued. "I will be the new, permanent chief executive officer. The entire board will resign, and I will appoint a new one. I will be given a controlling interest in the company I leaned forward. You don't need a CISO anymore. You need a queen. Those are my terms. You have 5 minutes." They took one. The Wall Street Journal ran a follow-up piece a week later. I kept a copy of it. The headline read, "The Cassandra of FinTech. How Nina Flores's foresight could save OmniPay." The article detailed the elegance of the Aegis Vault's architecture. It praised my integrity. It was complete and total vindication. This is my office now. The 40th floor. The view is of the entire city. The gaudy, masculine furniture Chad favored is gone, replaced by clean lines, functional art, and quiet purpose. My succulent rootkit sits on the corner of a massive polished oak desk. It's evening. The city lights are beginning to glitter. On my monitor, the Aegis Vault hums along, a river of pure, protected data. All green. I pour myself a glass of Lafroig and walk to the window. I look down at the world I now command. There is no feeling of grandeur, no sense of world-changing importance. There is only a deep, quiet, and intensely personal satisfaction. I am in control, and my work has just begun.